Hemshech Beis, Volume 1, page Reish Chaf 220, middle of Discourse 29, Padav Shalom Nafshi, chapter 114. A lengthy discussion on Yaakov's matzeva, on Yaakov's setting up, lifting up the stone, turning it into a pillar. A discussion that began chapter Kuf Zayin 107, which itself is a subplot, sub-discussion within the context of Even Sapir, the third interpretation is Sfira. And this is going to go on for another one chapter, two chapters, two more chapters. So from Kuf Zayin through Kuf Tezvav, literally 10 chapters, is the story of Yaakov and Lavan, but primarily Yaakov and Matzeva. So where are we in this Yaakov and Matzeva? The stone represents Malchus, Nekudas HaMalchus. So a stone is a Nekuda. The Rebbe Rashab brought a different source of the Meir the Nekuda. Nekuda means it's something that is not yet developed. Think of it like a seed. So a stone represents, a stone also is a letter. Asius Avonim. So it's a letter. What's a letter? A letter Aleph, a letter Beis. It's not yet developed into a language. Yaakov taking Malchus and lifting it up, upright, and setting it up as a pillar, which he began on his way to Charan, and then on his way out of Charan, and then we learn it again in the Pasha, this Pasha, Vayishlach, is the idea of taking Malchus, this unadorned, undeveloped, or unexpanded Nekuda, and lifting it up. So initially, the first interpretation is Malchus of Atzilus, Les Lamagar Maklum, is like the moon, has no light of its own. And what Yaakov did was Mamshech. He brings energy into it. He takes this Nekuda of the moon, of Malchus, and turns it into a fully developed thing. Binyan HaMalchus sometimes. He calls it Hakomas HaMalchus. And then there is a second interpretation of Eid Yashlemer at the end of chapter Kuf Ches, where he says, the end of chapter Kuf Tes 109, where he says, Gam Yashlemer, the Bechinas Nekuda Zel Bechinas Malchus Kamesha Mislap Sheshes Bebiyah. The Malchus is the way which carries the energy of the divine into Biyah. Now Biyah, as we've discussed at length, is a world of Nivroim. Nivroim can still be connected to the divine, but now they're an entity of their own. And the divine is more of a, not a tangible reality, but one that they know it exists. So Malchus enters in Biyah, there it gets concealed. Like he said, there's two levels. How it becomes Atik, becomes the crown of Biyah, it's still concealed, and then how it spreads out. So Malchus is like the king. Think of the king. The king, his real personality is hidden from, is beyond and above his citizens, his subjects. But he does interact with them. As he spreads out, he's concealed among them. And we spoke at length the avodah of that. That's basically how Malchus, how the nefesh of the kids, the divine soul, enters into the animal soul in Biyah. So the Nekuda, the Yud of the Evan, is now under the control of the animal soul. And in this material world, it also refers to Golus, as opposed to Zman Beis Hamikdash. Nephilas HaMalchus, Sukkos David Nephilas. So Malchus descends, falls in a fallen state. Yaakov's avodah is the first process of helping give us the power for generations to come. Maisa Ovis, similar Banim, the Ovis gave us the power to lift up this hidden and concealed Malchus within us, within the world. To lift it from Biyah, it should reconnect to Malchus and Atzilus. So the Nekuda connects to that, and then Malchus and Atzilus to connect to its higher levels. And then all of this, of course, is really bringing down levels that are even beyond Atzilus, which is what we're getting to.
And this reconnecting is taking Biyah with it?
Yeah. It doesn't really discuss that right now. Right now it's really the elevation, but ultimately the goal is, let's go back to the language of the moon, as we discussed in this last chapter. So the moon begins as just a Nekuda, just a point. It expands. And as it expands, it transmits the energy down to Biyah, to earth. So there's really a three-step process here, which is really the story of the spheres, if you think about it. It's in a concealed state, so you have to create a revelation. So Malchus in Biyah is in a concealed state, and you want to reveal. You want to reveal the divine spark within all of us. Then you want to connect that divine spark in Atzilus itself the first interpretation, that Malchus connects to Tiferes. That's what we went back to in last chapter. That's not just Malchus that's hidden in Biyah, connects to Malchus at the end of Atzilus, but the Malchus at the end of Atzilus connects with Tiferes. And this is called the full moon. This is actually the full moon. Malchus of Atzilus connecting with the higher spheres. Because Zoh is the sun, and Malchus is the moon. Zoh is Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yesod. So the sun and the moon is a reflection of the sun. When the moon is in its birth, it doesn't reflect the sun. That's Malchus as a Nakuda. When Malchus connects with Tiferes, Malchus is connecting with the sun. So he explained this in the last chapter that Malchus, like every sphere, has two halves. Has the 5 higher spheres in it, the 5 lower. So just like this, the Kadur, the sphere itself of the moon, there's a part that's always facing the sun, which is the higher 5 spheres of Malchus. They're always revealed. But they're not facing Biyah. They're not facing earth. Think of Malchus, that's like the student facing the teacher, upward. So Malchus, the end of Atzilus, is looking up at the sun. But there's another half of Malchus that's facing downward, into Biyah. It's like the king, he's turning to Hashem, so the king is turning to Hashem, and his back is to us. His back is to us is dark. So the second half, of Malchus is the lower half, which is the outer dimension of Malchus, that goes to Biyah. There, sometimes irradiates, sometimes not. And basically, at the beginning of the month, it begins to start getting sunlight, then it continues to grow. A full moon means that also the lower half is also illuminated. Our question yesterday was, does this mean also physically, only spiritually? Spiritually, it's understood, fine. So in other words, not just the 5 upper levels of Malchus are radiating, but also the 5 lower. They penetrated. But Begashmias, does it work that way? Because Begashmias, when it's shining down, then the other side is dark. It's true that's just based on the orbit, but I think technically it doesn't really matter to our Havana here, because at the end of the day, whether it's actually the whole moon is illuminated, or only the full angle is illuminated to us, I think is more of a technical thing, and we were going to research that. But as far as the Havana, it's very clear. It means that's what Yaakov does. He lifts up the Evan, which is essentially the dark side, and starts bringing light into it. And this is what happens in Man Shlema. Man Shlema, the 15th generation from Avram Avinu, was Kaim Esira Bashlemusa. I never researched it, but it sounds like that the moon was always full by him. Pash Begashmias. Every night the moon was full. It's just the level of Kaim Esira Bashlemusa. Sure, because I remember hearing or reading that the moon was always full, but that would mean that it was always stood still.
Of history, it was like
Okay, fine, I got it. So what's the story? It's based on Migdash, as we learned. And we learned several times already. And I'm referring now back to the parentheses in chapter Kuv Vav. And then again in Kuv Zayin, 106, 107. And then again a few other times. Basically talking about 3 different periods in history where this revelation Malchus is elevated. One is in the beginning of creation. That's Adam. Rosh Tevis Adam, David, Mashiach. Beginning of creation was Shechina B'Tachtenim, which we learned earlier. And before the Chet, that's why there were no need for Levushim. The light shined. No parsa. So the light shined through Malchus, right? That's one. The second is David, I guess, referring to like Shlema. David built the Beis HaMikdash, David prepared the ground for the Beis HaMikdash, but that idea that you have now the Gilead Beis HaMikdash, as opposed to Golus. Golus, Malchus, is fallen. Beis HaMikdash. And then La'asad Lavi, Mashiach will come, when obviously it will be a permanent situation, where, as we learn, Yiyeh. That will be twice Yud-Kei. So the Vav-Kei, which is how Malchus is below, elevates. These are words we've learned already before. And he repeats them again in this chapter. But outside of the Beis HaMikdash, so that's Kaim Esir, but that's already the moon. That means that, so two steps here. Zah, Tiferes, which is the essence of Zah, radiates even to the lower 5 spheres of Malchus. So the moon is full. As a result, we see the full moon, and Biyah is radiated and elevated as a result, as Malchus intended to Biyah. That's the essential point. What happens not in the time of the Beis HaMikdash? is then we only see, as he says in Biyah, you only have Mitzias Elikus. Even the angels, they know that God exists, but they don't see a full moon. You can say that they maybe see a darkened moon. They don't see a full moon I'm talking about it metaphorically speaking. They know it exists. In Atzilus, you see it as if it's right in front of you. Mahus. Mitzias is you know of it, like we talked the example. Mahus is when somebody's with you in the room. Mitzias is they left the room and you tell someone they were just here. So I know that they exist, but I don't see it.
They know of it or they are it?
Well, Mitzias means you know of it. You know of its existence. It's like Mispar, what we spoke about Mispar. You know the number. You know 1,000,000, 100,000. You haven't counted it yourself, and with your fingers you know 1, 2, 3. What means 100,000? What do we even know what 100,000 is unless we actually the value of it? Okay, and the shamas he said, whose personality is elikus as opposed to malachim, they do have some asaga, but it's also not. It's also mitzias, like he says, even Moshe, even the highest souls, panai you don't see. So he explained panai in the parentheses. Panai is either panai is mohus and achera is mitzias, or achera is mohus of the mitzias, or mohus of the acharaim of chachma. Okay. And the shamas, once they reach in Gan Eden, it's not because of the level of the world, it's because they're Torah and Aved that give them appreciation of the deeper power, like he says in Tanya, that it's Torah that gives us ability to receive and contain Muhus Alakus. Shem Eiz, he says, La'ama Yitain. Now, Shal Pisei Der Shtalshlus, you go to the regular order of things, before Yaakov comes into the picture, everything is gradations. There's a tzimtzum, a kav, world after world after world, it diminishes. Light diminishes as it goes. That's the Seder Hadvarim. So therefore, when Malchus enters Biyah, it's natural, like the moon. The moon all month long is in it's a very limited flow. What is Kaimasir B'Shlemus in Aveda or in this? Is that you give it a burst of energy. That means you're drawing in an energy from the Mailam Seder Ishtalshus. That's how we finish the chapter. So Kaimasir B'Shlemus Shia Gili Gam Beis the Malchus Ze Gam Kin Lo Yapi Seder Ishtalshus. Now Seder Ishtalshus. How does it work? The 5 higher spheres radiate, the 5 lower ones don't. Think of it like a teacher and a student. But then, when you want to elevate the student to another level, you need to bring in another energy. So to make Chitzenius HaMalchus, the outer dimension of this Nekuda, of this point, of this moon, to be like the inner, that has to come from a higher place. So now, in the next chapter, he's going to discuss where does it come from. But you see already the setting the stage for the levels we've been talking about. Remember, the whole Ayin Beis begins with interface of what? Of Gvul. First of all, of Helam, of the concealed world, connecting it to the Gvul of Elikus, meaning the Keich HaGvul, the 10 hidden spheres, which is the source of the 10 revealed spheres. That in turn reveals Bligvul. So the same thing is going to be here with Yaakov. So Mispar is more the Kalim, more the Gvul of Spheres. Sipur is telling the story already also of the source of the Gvul and also of the Bligvul. And Evan Sapir is where it becomes completely transparent. So essentially, if you think of it, the image of it is a beautiful image. Think of it like, here's a table. It begins out, when you look at the table, godliness is concealed. Our job, the first job, is to remove some of the concealment, use the table for something constructive, for something holy. So now you've given it a little. The table isn't just an independent force that can be used for destructive purposes. It's now been aligned. You mekadesh it. You eat a meal at it with a bracha. You make it into some type of mizbeach. Okay, I'm just using an example of the table. Then that's revealing the malchus. You're elevating it. Then you bring it to a point where it gets completely aligned with why God created the table. It says that the whole table is now dedicated to the divine, complete dedication. So there, the gvul of this table is aligned with the gvul of Elikus, why God wanted it to be. And then comes the next level, which is, that's where Malchus gets connected to Feres, what I just said. That's the gvul. But to do that, you have to reach a higher level than Ishtalshlus, because how do you transform a table that's in domain of Chayil, of the mundane? So that, you need to have the Erab Ligvul that comes from higher than Ishtalshlus, that gives the power to elevate, and that's going to be Yaakov. Yaakov is the Feres, the Kavem Tzoi. He goes all the way to Primius HaKesed, draws the energy into Malchus, makes a full moon. The full moon radiates into a physical world, a biyah, where everything is concealed, and hopefully that brings Mashiach. That's what I just said is the dynamics, the steps. So it's Helam to Gvul of Elikus, so it's to Bli Gvul of Elikus, and then of course all the way to Atzmus.
The Rebbe said Malchus is the Paris, is the Indian of learning about Mashiach and not bringing Mashiach.
So now chapter 114, V'sheiresh Hamshacha Zu. The root of this Hamshacha, which Hamshacha? The Hamshacha that Yaakov accomplishes by creating the full moon, meaning revealing even the 5 outer spheres, which means the 5 outer dimensions, the 5 lower spheres of the outer Chitzenius of Malchus, revealing the Pnimius of it, which think of it, like I said, like a student that begins with Aleph Beis, that's an Os. The Os becomes a word, now the word becomes part of an idea, and now the idea is being connected to the source. So the root of this transmission, because to transform something, remember we said this several times, you cannot transform something from within the system. You need to go outside of the system to change the system. So the root of it is from Pnimis Atzmis Ein Sof, Shalamayla Mayla B'chinas Hishtalshlus. That's higher, that beyond the cosmic order. So the cosmic order is how God puts it into place. Now the question is the elevation of it. The B'chinas Chitzenius the Ein Sof, Sheyesh Leza Sheichel Seder Hishtalshlus. Now he's bringing back all the aces about Keich HaGvul, Eir HaGvul. So it's beautiful here. Because Chitzenius Ein Sof, meaning the outer dimensions of the divine, infinite light, which has a relationship, an erech, a type of commensurate, a certain relationship, connection with the cosmic order. That Hamshacha, that transmission, is in an orderly, progressive, hierarchy way. Remember we learned at length the hierarchy of the spheres and so on. It's fundamentally a fundamental structure. Here, it's going back to a language we haven't seen in a while, because this is the Medida B'rotzen. This is how that in the desire there was a measurement, there was an assessment, there was an estimate. Shashir ba'atzmei, remember those words, where he estimated within himself the hayir b'midah v'gvul. Let's go back to the example I've been using then when we used it. Think of it as an artist can create infinite amount of pieces of art. Then he chooses and he estimates in himself, I want to do this piece of art. So the Bligvul has estimated within it, the Medid the Berotz, the B'Yisem Shir B'Atzmei. So the whole point, now he has to do this art. Now he's chosen to do this art. So the flow, that's Chitzenius say. Now the Pnimius is the artist as he is in himself, which has infinite potential. Now he's chosen to do one piece of art. So the flow that comes out of here is not another piece of art. It's this piece of art. And that is a flow that's subject to progression. To radiate, illuminate, with measure and with parameters. That the transmission should be with an orderly progression and level by level. So, if you're talking about how you are in your infinite self, so to speak, your infinite possibilities, then it's a bleak vul type of flow. There's no order. It just, like he spoke a little about how the melech is when he's besimcha. But when you're talking that you have now estimated, you've determined you want to build this house and not another house, these 10 spheres and not others, now this in turn generates a flow that is very progressive and orderly that has to now shape existence based on this image. Now, is God bound by the image? He's not bound by it, but this is what he chose. And that's in the root. That's all the way in the root. So that's the sphere of Sagnuzis, basically, the 10 hidden spheres. So it can't come from Chitzenius and stuff. So how do you change now that? Okay, so now let's go further. I think the marshal works very well. So the art is this world, the tables, the chairs, the animals, everything. Now you're coming and saying we have to make a dira b'tachtenim, we have to change the world. In other words, we're going in now into the art, and we have to elevate the art. It's not enough for it to just stay where it is, because it's concealed from the artist. It's not aware of the artist. So how are you going to change it? If you're going to use the energy that created the art, all you can do is create art. Right. So you need to go back to the engine room. You need to go back to the artist that had different options, because it's the only place where you can go and rewire.
Tap deeper into the seichel.
Right. So in other words, we have the power to reshape the piece of art. Not that we are creating another world, but we're taking the art that God created and turning it into a far more beautiful, revealing first of all godliness in it, and obviously elevating it to places that the art could never have reached on its own. That's essentially the picture. So basically, think of it this way: the world is a beautiful piece of art. The soul is sent by God into this art to do something, to change it. So we're like messengers in a landscape, on a what do we call it? On a I wanted to use a what does the artist create? He creates a there's the easel, the portrait,
On the canvas.
Yeah, on the canvas.
The sketch.
No, the portrait is the right word. There's another word I wanted to use. The panorama or something. Okay. So the world is one big beautiful piece of art on its own till Adam Arish and Chava are created. It's a great world, piece of art. But leave it as it is, it's going nowhere. It's a clock. It will go through its motions perfectly. It will never waver from God's will. But like a clock, the sun will rise, the sun will set, the moon, there's the animals, everything will go perfectly. But to create a dir b'tachtenim, it's not. It's a piece of art that is essentially inanimate art. I mean, inanimate in the sense that it's not going out.
Yeah, why? Yeah.
Okay, no. So, what's your answer?
You want something different.
What's your answer?
That's
No. But no. Let's say they did not sin. What's missing? Tell me what's missing.
Free will.
What does that mean? That's not an end in itself. What's missing is on a basic level, first of all, God doesn't need to make kunsten. So what's the point of this art? Why did He make it? He wants the art to reconnect to Him in the deepest way. That's what a dir b'tachtenim means. So when you have ikr shechina b'tachtenim, yes, there's a divine awareness there, but it's not the awareness of God Himself. It's awareness of the lowest levels of God. It's how God manifests there. So number one, He wants to have a connection all the way with Him. That's number one. Number two. Right. Yeah.
Even though it says ikr, could it still be an aura of atzmos?
It's definitely hard. It's not atzmos. Because Adam and Chava now came to do something. Your real question is, what did they come to do? If there was no chet, what did they come to do the second before the chet? It's true they were tested, etc. And it's true that the chet obviously brought, but there was a reason they could do a chet, because the world itself, even though, this question is asked in Chassidus, if the world was a perfect divine world, how could they even do a chet? And the answer, one of the answers given, is a beautiful order from the Rebbe about it, that they came into a world where there was a possibility to wander away from God, and to eliminate even the possibility. So had they not eaten from the Chet Tzadaz, they would have brought Mashiach. Well, they would have eliminated the possibility of sin. Instead, they took the possibility and turned. In other words, this world is aligned to godliness, but it's also possible to go away from it. Before the art was created, it can go away. But Ayin saw before the Tzimtzum cannot in any way disconnect from the source. This world that was created was a perfect piece of art, but it potentially could disconnect. And then the potential became actual. When we do our Aveda now, we will eliminate that potential. So forever the art will then be connected with God. That's one way to explain it.
So there was a b'chira then.
Yeah, I mean, but it wasn't a b'chira because God did create the test. He did create a world that could potentially go that way. So you could say He set it up. Did He actually push their hand to eat from the tree? The answer is no. But He definitely created if He had not created any helam, it'd be not possible for them to defy His will. So there was definitely a helam. Look, a tzimtzum was created by God. That was not created by man. But that we should be deceived by the tzimtzum, that's up to us. In other words, God can say, I'm going to hide my presence from you. You can interpret it two ways. You could say, okay, that means He's challenging me to find Him. Or you could say, you know what? He's not here. I got an agenda. I'll get back to you later. That's a choice. That's a choice we make right now. Now, obviously, it's pretty. You could say it's a setup, but it's nevertheless there is a choice. The choice exists today also. You also have the choice today. You could either choose to open your eyes, or you could choose not to open your eyes. Anyway, but 1 second.
That was His taiva. What was His taiva? If you create everything exactly, what kind of taiva would that be? If it was or wasn't, the taiva was that.
Now, but I want to just add something else from Samach Vov that's very important here. So why was it tzimtzum create? Why was there a tzimtzum? Because there could not be an independent reality. We could not sense ourselves as an independent reality. Dira b'tachtenim really means that independent reality that senses itself as independent from God should be wise enough to reconnect. That's it. So he says in Perek Lamed Vav, Dira b'tachtenim, he says, what's tachtenim mean? Tachtenim doesn't mean physical tachtenim, doesn't mean the lowest, like your second floor, the first floor, the best basement. It means tachtenim b'gilei el akus. That is the world that has the least amount of divine revelation, which really means that there's a yesh. You and I are yesh. We're yesh. We feel that we're independent reality, and when we come and realize we're not, that's the biggest chid. That is nesava. That you fulfill God's taiva. Why that taiva? We don't have an answer, but that's what he wanted. Now, 1 second. Let's go a step further now. So he says so. So in other words, it's tzimtzum. An art. Remember, we do have one piece of art, not a million pieces of art. The art may be aligned. Before the Chet Tzadas, it's aligned. But it is a world that is independent. There is an independence going on. It's true, animals are not going to defy God's will, but man would. So now comes, God puts Adam and Chava on earth. So the Mishnah says, why were they created last? So he gives two reasons. Two seemingly contradictory. Why? Because the guest. So you don't bring a guest, a special guest, to a table that's empty. So you bring the table, you bring the guest after the whole table was set. The second answer given, that if man sins, afili yitush kadma, that even an insect, even a mosquito, even an insect preceded you. Are we a special guest or we're lower than an insect? The answer is, it depends how you behave. You walk down the street, it says in Chassidus, there's an expression that when a wicked person, walks on the street, the cobblestones cry out, who are you to walk on me? Petach. What right do you have? I never defied God. What right do you have to take your defiled feet and walk on me? So then you're even lower than the stone, because the stone never went against. You have an option. You're hungry, you see suddenly a beautiful apple tree. And the apple starts talking to you. Okay, it could be other types, but let's say an apple. So you have three options. You can ignore it, move on. You could fresh the apple, not a bracha, without anything, and just indulge in it, and then use the strength to hurt somebody. Or you can take the apple, make a bracha, thank God, and use the strength to help somebody. If you do nothing, okay, you didn't change anything. You lost an opportunity. If you do the second thing, which is use it for selfish purposes, you've taken the energy of the apple, and the apple can say to you,
you actually overcame your desire.
No, I didn't mean it that way. I meant more that you would lose an opportunity, because I didn't mean so much the taiva here. I meant using the world around us. Anyway, so second thing is, you use it for destructive purposes. The apple could have a tiny to you. It will have a tiny. What right did you have? I was sitting on the tree, not hurting anyone. I was doing what God wants me to do. But the apple also is not elevated. So what right did you have to eat me? Third option is the apple thanks you, because I would have remained on the tree and been on this piece of art and been a nice little apple in this big portrait. You took me, and now we've connected me to something even greater, a mitzvah. And you've made me part of revealing the divine in this art. That's essentially, then, obviously, you're the guest that comes after the world. If you behave in a destructive way, then even the apple, even the yitush, is higher than we are. Now here, what he says in Samach Vav like this now. Samach Vav, he says that the Tzimtzum Addition was needed to conceal the divine reality so that an independent entity could arise, an independent consciousness. Now the purpose, of course, as I said, is the independent consciousness should reconnect. So he asked the question in Samach Vav, what's the point? Afterwards came a kav anyway. So why not just leave the kav? We learned this also here. Why not just leave a small kav? Why do you have to have a complete dark black hole and then send a layer of light? So his answer is because the kalim would never be able to emerge. So you need the teacher to be completely silent, then starts a stream of consciousness, and slowly. So you're getting back to square one. The Ayin Sof before the Tzimtzum was there already. What are we accomplishing? Like we asked before, what is the accomplishment that this art is now aligned? It was aligned. The answer is no. There was no art then. Before the Tzimtzum, what was aligned, there was no other possibility. Here, in a place that on its own began and could only exist if the light was concealed, and it should be aware, is a chiddush. But then he says, "Ve'ed yesh lemer." that the chiddush is that's just the chiddush you got back. Essentially, it's not really square one, because you could say now the student has become like the teacher. Okay, before there was no student. That's the difference. Before the Tzimtzum, there's no student. But then he says the chiddush is, and then we mamshech an Ayin that's even higher than what was lifnei at Tzimtzum. Because when you transform this material world, that mole klippos to sitrach that can go against God, you don't just bring back the light as it was, you bring back higher. This is the yesod of whole Samach Vav. Here he talks, you see, Samach Vav is far more, like I always say, is more ben shanasa eved. There it's much more focus on Aveda and breaking the klippa and breaking the darkness and revealing that higher light that I just said. That's higher. Here it's actually more mamayel lamati. He talks in some Ayin Beis, he talks more about how to infuse it in existence. There it's more about like going beyond existence, and here it's like bringing it back into existence. This is like the next step, somewhat like, yeah. Samach Vav is more skafi. There's overlap, obviously. This is more Torah, that's more Tefillah. That's more Aveda, this is more Torah. In general. But remember, there's a lot of overlap. In Yiddishkeit, you need both. You need to bring down, you need to go up. But here it's like, after you do the Aveda Mamat Lamayla Yigiyah, then the Kavanah L'Asr, the Mashiach will be, that we bring it all down into, that's why the focus here is more according to the Shitta that Eidos HaMitziyarim. Because you want to bring it into existence, into the structure of existence. In Samach Vav, the focus is more lifting the structure beyond structure. It's not a contradiction, it's two steps. So first came Samach Vav. First was lifting it beyond, and then was bringing that into. That's what we're learning now. So the bottom line, there is a chiddush therefore that the art is elevated. So he's saying like this: but to elevate the art cannot come from the same energy that created the art. So when you hear Asara Mamoris, you hear Desha, Shidesha, Imairis, and all the other Mamoris, that is the artist shaping the art based on the envisioning of God that he wants this piece of art. Now comes the work, how do you elevate this? That's Malchus, like the moon. The moon is diminished. That's Malchus as it's in Biyah, it's a concealed state, and there's gradations. There's higher levels, lower levels. How do you bring from lower levels backwards? How do you now, in other words, reverse the start? Here it's diminishing. How do you bring the light? So you need to bring something from very high up. You bring it, in other words, here the light got diminished. Now it's down here. How do you get this going back? So you need some power that can't come from the thing that gave it being. You need something that comes from outside of Shtalshalos that is given to us the power, and we reverse it and we bring it back upward.
Which is what? The Shem is from the
We're going to learn. We're learning this now. So it can't come from Chinsenius Erein Sof, like he just said. That's the Medida Berotzen. That's how God envisioned. The artist is envisioning the structure. So from that energy, you're only going to get a structure. You're not going to get beyond structure. Now, obviously, as I'm sure Doctor can remind us, since God is all one, obviously, even in his easel and in his brush, when he's painting it, there's also the power of Bligvul that's and Ishtalshalos. But from our perspective, we can't access that because that we can only be accessing because we have to do it in an orderly way. So right now so how do you bring in a higher power? So he says, only from the inner dimension of Ein Sof. It's very similar to what he said before. Remember all the spheres he said there's a Chetzenius of spheres, Pnimius of spheres. The 5 lower spheres, the other side, that dark side of the moon, and the 5 higher spheres. So now he's talking the Shadish is also Pnimius Ein Sof. She'ein shaykh l'ishtalshalos klal. That has no relationship at all to this. Let's call it to this artist's process of creating art. Okay? From there comes the revelation that is not in any orderly fashion progression. The Maimah Kav Hamida. Now Kav Hamida is exactly what I just said. What's a Kav Hamida? It's a paintbrush. It's a Kav Hamida. It's a pen that draws with measured drawing. It's not ink, Bligvul ink. It's a pen. It's a Kav Hamida. Kav Hamida is expression for a measuring, like a ruler or like what do we call it? Like when you measure in a tube. You take medicine or for children, that type of measuring cup. Measuring, what is it called? Not a cup. Measuring stick, a measuring rod. Yeah. I mean, whatever it is, and geologists use it. What is that thing called? When they...
Check the oil level, you put a stick in.
No, people stand at a corner and they like...
Lever?
It's like a yellow...
Survey?
Surveyor. What do they do? What does that thing do exactly?
I think they built
You know what I mean? You see it sometimes on corners. You see them on corners. But you also see in time of George Washington and these, they had these, when they looked at land, I don't think it was laser then. Huh?
They're doing elevations.
To see, right, the like levels. To see how level it is.
Levels.
No, because streets, let's say Kingston Avenue is like on an incline. You have to consider that in every type of...
And also, like,
look, when you build a building, for example, on a mountain, it's not the same thing. You have to really calculate the whole... Okay. Remember, that was the sid that was on that pasuk, the whole thing with the sun. Yoshis Kegibber Loretz Eirach. The Yoshis, so Yoshis Gibber Loretz Eirach, we said, was what? That he celebrates like a strong man, powerful man, Kegibber. Loretz Eirach, to run the distance, to run the length. Basically, we're talking about a powerful surge, which is what creates Kaimas Mishnah. So he says, the Yoshis Bigematri Keser. Yoshis is Bigematri of Keser. For Yoshis, who base Pomim Yesh. And Yoshis is twice Yesh. So Keser Shin Yud is 310. Keser is 620. So twice Yesh, twice Yoshis, it's like twice Shai. Shem Beis Chatzoi HaKeser. So you have here now both halves of Keser. That's what Yoshis refers to. So Yoshis is two halves of Keser. Atik and Arich. The Mebchinis Mechza HaElyen. Remember, we're talking now in the Sheirish. In Malchus, it's the first half, is the top half of the moon and the bottom half of the moon. Or better, the outer half of the moon and the inner half of the moon. Or the inner half and the outer half. The 5 higher spheres, the 5 lower spheres. In Keser, which is the root of Malchus, the higher half of Keser, Pnimisa Keser, Misham Davke, Husherisham Shachazes, Liz Gilim, Husalakusat Lamatamat. From the inner dimension of Keser, is from there specifically is the root of the transmission, this transmission to reveal the personality of the divine, all the way ad lamatmat, all the way below, to the lowest levels. Then this is what the Zohar says, remember the beginning of last chapter, the Habi Yaakov Talya Milsa, when it says that Yaakov is the one, it says V'ukam la. Because the Habi Yaakov Talya Milsa L'ma'avid Yatir Mibnei Alma. Because Bnei Alma is to say the creatures of the world, the people of the world, the citizens of the world can only do what the art dictates. This means Yaakov Talya Milsa. Yaakov B'chinas HaTeferes. Yaakov is higher than Bnei Alma. He is the level of Teferes. Teferes is what? She'el Ad HaKeser. Teferes is the Kavam Tzai, the middle rod, the Briach HaTichin, that runs from the lowest to the highest. So that's why Yaakov, it depends on Yaakov. Teferes She'el Ad HaKeser. V'yadua,
here it says Yaakov talking about it's
yeah. V'yadua, and it's known the Hainu B'chinas Pnimis HaKeser Dafka. Means, and that what is referring to She'ela the Keser Teferes is not just the Chitzenis Keser, to the outer Keser, to the higher inner dimension, the inner half, Atik in other words. Like we said earlier, Radla. This is the middle rod that we've discussed, like by the Mishkan when they build the walls. So what bound one wall to the next? So there were rods that connected, short rods that connected one wall to the next, like short rod. Then you had one. Then on the bottom the same thing, top, bottom. Then the middle, along the entire length and width, was a center rod called Briach HaTichin. Architecturally, that's what keeps. If you just have small rods, you won't have, like you build a sukkah. You'll have the walls connected, but it still can sway. That middle rod creates that, it's like the spine. It's like the spine. It creates the centrifugal balancing force. There's different shittas. What the same rod went through, or a rod along the whole thing, and then another rod like that.
Same rod went through.
So bent at the corner.
Yeah. Minakatsa, that's what they all touch.
I thought there was a two taich, and I thought there was minakatsa. I think there's another taich. I think the taich minakatsa is like the whole length. Okay, maybe not. I don't.
The idea is clear.
But the idea is clear. However you twist it, it goes from one end to the next. Emes, like he says in Tanya. Aleph Mem Sof. Aleph is the first of the letters, Sof is the last, and Mem is the middle. That's a B'rich HaTichon. So Emes is true from the beginning through the middle to the end. Sheker, by the way, are three letters that are near each other. Kuf, Resh, Shin, close to the end. Then comes Tuf. Because Sheker Ein Le Raglayim, it says. It doesn't have its own feet, so the lies have to congregate with each other. Every lie needs to bring another lie. Every lie needs to have a neighbor that's a lie, basically, to cover up. Emes is secure. You can be here, another person on the other end of the world, another one in the middle. Because we have Raglayim.
Solid footing.
Never heard that taich?
Yeah, when Lane told me.
Yeah. And the Basel Guy says the goal is to transform the sheker into kesher. Kesher and keresh, yeah. Yeah.
That's cute.
Now what?
Albany, Montgomery, and Troy. That's where he lives. It's MS.
That's what my neighbor said. I'm the wife said that.
Okay, I'm glad you added the Shem Emre.
I don't want to do my wife.
Okay. He used this as a fundraising pitch. Well, there was a magazine called Pravda. Pravda means emes, right? So whenever you have a magazine that announces that it's true, you know what that means. Certified lie. So there was also a Yiddish communist magazine called Emes, but it was spelled Ayin Mem Ayin Samach. Yeah, truth. Imagine a newspaper says truth. You get an email. This is the truth. You can open. In Yiddish, there was a communist, and they spelled it Ayin Mem Ayin Samach. And some say because he was forced to do it, so they wouldn't realize the Goyish Shekef. So he called it Emes. That was basically telling you. It says Emes as the spelling of this name.
No, the actual guy who did it?
Yeah, they have. Vergelis. No, but he was not the founder. He was not the founder.
He was on the phone?
No. But I feel like communists are the Chanitz. It's like those Muslims would come and say I'm a Mossad, Vergelis was later. I think Vergelis was Pravda. Vergelis, no?
No, he was this magazine.
Magazine Emes. Okay, but anyway, Stalin actually created a province that where they spoke Yiddish. Where he wanted to send all the Jews.
You know the John.
Yeah, a lot of
It's not the
Chinese and Korean. I think it was the second language. I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal about it. It's an amazing article.
And then it never worked out.
No, they have.
To a certain extent, it worked out.
They're teaching
What do you want? What was the idea behind it?
Koreans and Chinese.
I guess like a ghetto,
Jews don't need Eretz Yisrael.
If had he lived a year or two more, he would have shipped all the Jews from Russia into that area.
Yeah,
That's what he was planning.
And
55.
and oppress them or no?
55 he was dead.
Shipped them all off over there.
55 he was dead.
53 he died. Putin.
What was that?
Like-
The idea
Hoo-ha.
was to oppress them there?
He wanted to do it in 55, but he died.
The
What
idea
a
was
story.
to
Were you there?
The idea was
I wasn't
to
even
oppress
born.
them there or
Hurrah,
to
hurrah.
oppress them? Or
But I remember my Shved traveled to Russia. In the 70s, he came back and he brought with him an English-Russian newspaper. I saw it. I wish I saved it.
He wasn't afraid to travel in the 70s?
He went in the 70s. Some people went.
He didn't leave.
Anyway, he shows me the newspaper. The headline is a picture of New York City. Dark, like the streets are abandoned, and it says the last citizens of New York have just moved out of New York City because of the high rates of crime and Hefkedah space. And nobody knew otherwise. I said everyone thinks this is the truth because they had no other. The whole New York City. See, you only have is like an abandoned street, like someone took the last citizens of New York have moved out. They create another reality and Gandikt. For 70 years they were able to create. People had no idea.
Your father used to communicate with this guy,
I think he knew him. I don't know how much he communicated with him. When did he die? I remember Vergelis. I remember my father mentioning Vergelis. There were three. The Vergelis was not MS. Vergelis was the Yiddish Freiheit in New York. You sure Vergelis was there? You're right. I remember the name. Here there was three major. There was more than three. In the heyday there were like 20 Yiddish newspapers. There was the Amerikaner, there was the Tog, there was the Morgenal, there was the Forwitz, there was the Yiddish Freiheit, Morgen Freiheit. That means the morning freedom. It was communist.
20s.
No, that was 70s.
Yeah.
Not 70s, late 60s. It was still around. The Morgen Freiheit was the communist Yiddish newspaper. Forwitz was the socialist. The Morgen Journal was a little more for the Orthodox, and the Tog was secular, but not socialist. There's all these newspapers. Then the Targum Morgan in the 50s merged. My father joined them in the end of the 50s, early 60s.
And it became?
And then then they closed it in 1972. The owner,
What was it
Arthur Jacobson,
What was it called?
Tog Morgen Journal.
Talk
That's where Meckler, who wrote the Zechrenis, the Friedrich Rebbe, when he wanted his memoirs written, he said he wants to Dafka have a secular journalist. And he chose Meckler, Daled Lamed Meckler. Look at the beginning of Zechrenis. It says, Daled Lamed. He would sit by the Friedrich Rebbe. Friedrich Rebbe would dictate, and he wrote the whole Sefer Zechrenis, the 2 volumes.
What did he do?
Friedrich spoke and he wrote.
And he wrote.
What did
Like the Rebbe would do, like all 2 books.
He broke.
You look in the beginning, it says Daled Lamed Meckler.
So what did you need to do?
He wrote it. The Friedrich Rebbe just spoke. It was dictated. Someone had to write it.
I mean, he had to change the words around a little.
Dictating and writing is 2 different worlds. You know anything about writing? When someone dictates, it's not written. And writing is a work. You got to write the whole thing from scratch. Dictating is just telling you, like giving you pointers. He told them the stories, but then he had to write them.
He put them on take them himself.
Friedrich Rebbe was a good writer.
The Kutzit Burim, a lot of it is himself. Friedrich Rebbe was a very good writer, but the Zechrenis he asked for him. I don't know if Friedrich Rebbe could write that anymore as well, because his hand. But the Zechrenis are him. He was my father's boss. He was the editor-in-chief of Tog Morgen Journal. A very powerful individual. Then when so the Tog Morgen Journal was owned privately. Farvitz was owned by association. They had a radio station. It was on East Broadway down that time. I remember I used to go there, and they had a lot of money. They still have because of the radio. Tog Morgen Journal, the owner was 72. It was going down. The readership was going down. Advertising, etc. He closed it. One day, my father, he didn't tell anybody. He didn't want pressure. My father came to the offices, locked. I remember my father was like shocked because he had no clue. No warning. Everybody, hundreds of people were laid off right that morning. My father came home. I never saw my father in the middle of the day, and suddenly I see him in the house.
You don't work for a union.
So I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm out of a job."
You remember it?
I remember. It was very sad. My father's life was his work. But my father was a fighter. He didn't. Within a few months, he started the Allgemeine Journal. That's when he started, a weekly. The Rebbe's had a lot to do with the Rebbe. The Rebbe gave the name. Allgemeine is the Rebbe's name. Only a Rebbe can give such a name. Allgemeine means general or all-encompassing. But it's really a very German Yiddish name. Yeah, Allgemeine. So my father asked the Rebbe why. He said, Allgemeine newspaper has to be all-encompassing. Everything should be there. My father asked the Rebbe, does that mean even contrary opinions? He says, a newspaper is a newspaper. It's not a Shulchan Aruch. My Rebbe had very liberal opinions about the newspaper. I never told you the stories. They're very good stuff.
Funnies?
Very funny. I'll tell you one. There was some people who wrote. Some people here said to talk about the ghetto. They came to my father. They said, "Listen, a lot of people read this newspaper. And its heyday was like, I don't know if you remember Lamed Ches, when people used to line up when the paper came.
It had the sichos.
Not because of sich only. Also, no, Satmer for Samtamai. It was nice parshas. Anyway, so my father said that some people came to him and said, see the Rebbe's brilliance here, that he should have a Vad of Rabbanim should look over the newspaper every week to make sure everything is appropriate, the advertisers are, Right. So my father said to this Askin, what the Rebbe, he says, he thinks the Rebbe would agree. So my father said, listen, I go into the Rebbe my father went to the Rebbe pretty often, definitely his birthday and other times, and he spent a long time with the Rebbe. My father got a lot of unbelievable yechidus. And so my father said, I'll ask the Rebbe directly. So by the end of one of the yechidus, my father says to the Rebbe, there's some askonim, in Yiddish, that are suggesting a vad of rabbonim. So the Rebbe says to my father, what happens if the vad of rabbonim say you have to close down the paper? That was the Rebbe's question. So my father said, that's what I'm asking you. For rabbonim, the Rebbe thinks rabbonim should be the ones that decide. And that's what they say. That's what we'll do. So the Rebbe smiled broadly and said to him, Wie kommen Rabbonim reden wegen Zeitungen bechlal? He says, what do rabbis have to do with newspapers? A Rav has to paskin that a person is supposed to learn Torah kol hayom kol. He's supposed to learn Torah all day. And if you don't learn Torah all day, it's bittul Torah. Newspapers are for people who don't ask Rabbonim questions, or for people who what is it? The Rebbe said two things. People was fragen nicht kein Rabbonim, or there was folgen nicht kein Rabbonim. People who don't go to Rabbonim. A Rav has to say that you're supposed to learn Torah all day. So how can a Rav come and paskin about a newspaper? It's a contradiction. That's what the Rebbe said. Huh? Interesting, huh? You see the Rebbe was not saying you can do things that are not halacha. But it means to say, what do you? It's just like it's a complete distortion. So then the Rebbe says, you have a newspaper, have even people that don't go to Rabbanim. He said, that don't go to Rabbanim or don't listen to Rabbanim. That was what he said. Was Gainish to Rabbanim or Folgen. He says, even a person like that will see a Sikha in a newspaper, he'll also learn it. He'll learn it like that. That's how the Rebbe looked at it. Then the Rebbe told my father the whole story, but that's not for now. Anyway, so let's go on here. Emes, yeah. Mina kotza la kotza. If you do it, the kavam tzoy cholok mebez akav in the yamin small, the base dvarim. Now he's going to kavam tzoy. Let's go again. Remember, the structure of the human being is parallels the structure of the Mishkan, which is these three, and you also see this, and also the structure of the spheres. So the structure of the spheres is, even though you have 10 spheres, but very often you say the spheres are sometimes structured 1 through 10 in one line, but sometimes structured as a patruf, which would be Chochmah, right brain, Bina, left brain, Das, center brain. Chesed, right arm, Gevura, left arm, Tiferet, the heart, center. Netzach, right leg, Yehoid, left leg, Yesod is the center, the genitalia, the sexual organs. And Malchus is also the center, the female. So you have the structure. The Kav, the Teferes, or Yesod, Malchus, Das, is essentially like the spine. Well, that's the Kav Emtsai. That one runs all the way from the top to the bottom, like the spine. So the right arm only runs from here to here, like the other bars, the other rods that connected walls. The spine is what runs from beginning to end. So it goes from Pnimis HaKeser all the way down to Malchus. And of course, Teferes is right center that draws it down. So Teferes is the mamutza between, the interface between inner Keser to the outer Malchus. So the dark moon is going to get light through Teferes because you're reaching all the way into Pnimis HaKeser. That's transforming the art and not just creating it. To put it that way. Okay? So now he says, if you do it, the kavam tzoy cholok mebez akav dimin small bebeis dvarim. It's known, this kavam tzoy that I just said, the middle rod, as opposed to the right kav and the left kav, the right line and the left rod are different. They're distinguished in two ways. First difference is that the middle one runs all the way from the top edge of the top, higher than the two kavim that are also the shoshim gamkein bekeser. Chesed and gvura, and the middle rods also are rooted in keser. Achrak b'bchinas chetzenis hakeser. So think of it this way: the other smaller rods are also rooted in keser, but they begin here and they go here. The middle rod begins here and goes all lower. So it begins higher. So one begins in Pnimis HaKeser, the other ones begin in Chetzenis HaKeser.
Das is higher than Chacham, yeah.
In this sense, Das connects through the center. Like you said before, Moshe is Das Milagav, Yaakov is Teferes Milabar. Das and Teferes are the two steps in the center. The truth is, you don't really count Das when you count Keser. It's not spelling that out. The bottom line is, we talk about the center there. So that's one distinction. They're all rooted in Keser, but the Mavriach min HaKot Ste'el b'Yesel l'mayla min HaBeis Kavim. It's rooted all the way to the top of the mountain, so to speak, the top of the flow. In the inner Keser, higher than the two Kavim who's rooted in Keser, but only in outer Keser. Whereas the middle rod, the middle line, the middle spine, it's transmitted, it's rooted, the root of its transmission is from inner Keser. And it runs, Mavriach literally means runs, but it also means extends, all the way to the lowest point. B'yeser. All the way, Malchus, the lowest levels of Atzilus. So think of it, it's like, and by the way, in architecture you have that. That you always need something that connects all the way from the top. That creates a centrifugal force, they call it. Something that's like the balancing factor. So you need to have, like for example, if you had by the walls only a middle rod, it'd be wobbly by the top and the bottom, so you need the small rods that keep the connection from one section to the next, and then you have the one center one that really creates that final. No, there's a problem with that. It won't be as strong, I think. I'm almost sure it won't be as strong, because the fact that it connects each to the other Besides practical, it's just easier to build that way. I think there's an advantage of connecting. You want each wall connected to the other. If you build because the big one, think of you having only one in the center, it basically eliminates the individual balance of each individual one. I would think the smaller rods create more balance for the individual walls, and the center one creates a balance for all of them together.
The center rod is not as strong.
It may not be as strong, but it's more balancing. It depends how you look at it. Yeah. So there we go. So it runs all the way to the bottom of Malchus. Dehine chochma bina, dehine chub. Dehine chochma bina, had bina rak ad heiden is pashetes. Bina, it says only till Haid it reaches. So Bina reaches till Haid. So you have like this: Chochma, Chesed, Netzach. You have Bina, Gvura, Haid. So Bina's rod goes from there, goes only till Haid. It's rooted in Chesenis Keser, but it goes all the way to Haid. V'Yesod Abba Aruch, Shenim Shechad Yesod Zah. And Yesod Abba Aruch, which is the long Abba, which means Chochma. The Yesod of it extends to Yesod Zah. So again, it has a limit where it goes. Aval Kavem Tzai, the middle rod, the middle path, the middle line, Mavriach ad Bchinas HaMalchus. It runs all the way till Malchus, safe in the Kol Dargan. The end of all levels, Datzilis, of Atzilis. Ubchinas Achrein Shaba. And the end itself in the lowest level of Malchus. Meaning, as he said before, the 5 lower spheres, the outer part of the moon, of the Malchus. It's Kabbalistic terminology.
Sounds like center.
Yesod is foundation. It's a Kabbalistic term. He didn't explain it. You want to know the explanation? Basically, in the spheres as they structured, so Bina is the root of Haid. So Bina, it says, the comprehension will reach all the way to Haid. And similarly, Abba, not Abba, but it says Abba Aruch. It's really Yesod Abba. You see, Abba itself is a point. It's just a spark. But Yesod Abba is where Abba already begins to inform the lower levels. So Yesod Abba, the foundation of Abba, which is what connects it to the other levels, runs all the way to Yesod Zah, to the foundation or the connecting in Zah and Midas, basically.
That's on the right side, though.
But isn't that going?
As I understand, because it's on the right side, it seems like it's.
Yeah, but it's not. Yeah, but that's the language of Kabbalah. That's the level that we're.
So it's also not
No. Yesod Zah is Yesod. No. Yesod Zah is in Midas. It's Yesod within Midas. Yesod is in Kabbalah. He's not saying Yesod of the Abba. Yesod within Chachma runs into the Yesod within Midas. Okay. Avakavam Tzai runs all the way to the bottom of Malchus. So that's distinction number 1. That distinguishes the middle rod from the other 2. From the one on the right and the left. There's a second distinction, as he said. What's the second distinction? Beis the Eifan Hamshachaha, the way it transmits, who the Chlolos Hakav, he kimahus echad mamash. So besides that it reaches from the highest point to the next, also qualitatively, nothing changes. It's the same energy. The Chlolos Hakav is like one personality. V'loi kamoi habeis kavim kamoi chesed, chochma chesed netzach miyamin. That's chachan. Not like the right line, let's say. From the right side. Chesed is a different personality than Chochmah. The Beis Gimel Hay is Beis Bina Gvura Haid. Mismail, the same thing, Bina Gvura Haid on the left side. They're different personalities. They have similarities, but they're not. You can't say Chesed is Chochmah. Mashen ken das Teferes Yisod, which is the middle rod, the middle kulam he mahus echad mamish. They're literally one personality. Like it says elsewhere at length. So we really need to look there to understand the meaning. Here he's just stating the fact.
Even though the other ones are aligned in the same line, they're still different personalities.
Yeah.
The middle one is...
Yeah, it's Haba Hatalia. That's why one runs all the way from the top to the bottom. Think of it like the spine. The spine, and you can tell us more about this. The spine is not like other bones in the body. There is a there's an element in the spine that is a connector from the top to the bottom, even though it has sections in it. But there's something about the spine, at least my knowledge of it, is that there's a much more similarity between lower and other. In other parts of the body, you'd have to find, for example, let's see here. And nothing's compared to the spine, but maybe even the branches that branch off the spine are probably not as aligned or as not aligned as the same energy of the spine. The spine has in it the spinal cord, right? The spinal cord is really one entity that goes all the way from the bottom of the brain, from the stem, right, of the brain, all the way to the lower part of your back.
No, it's the top part of the lower back.
Okay, fine. So that runs, and then it branches off into all the, I don't know what they're called, yeah. So I guess that has a certain qualitative similarity, that whole the spinal cord. That's similar to what he's saying. It's not exactly but the idea. Whereas, for example, let's say ligaments or other things that connect other parts of bodies are not quite.
Sure, if you're connecting your right part of your brain down to chesed, I mean, where's the link? Where's the link you could visualize?
Yeah, but you're probably even in chiropractic or for that matter acupuncture or so. I'm sure there's plenty said about this thing. That there's the center lines and there's the right lines and the left lines.
I have charts.
Yeah, yeah. I'll try to find where's the Mokamaka Be'erich. I didn't look that up. What's type of explanation? How that's one Mahus Echad. But basically, I can tell you this: that Das, Teferes, and Yesod have one element there, pneumistic. That's what it is. The main thing that's different. In other words, he's saying not only that the first difference is that one runs all the way from the top to the bottom. The other ones only run from the lower level and don't go all the way. One's an express train through the whole thing, from the highest to the lowest point. The other ones are more locals and so on. But the second explanation is more the echus, the quality. The quality, basically, all three, Das, Teferes, and Yesod, all have that one similar power that they are they're balancers. They're balancers. So they have the power to unite the right and the left. So Teferes connects Chesed and Gvura, Das connects Chochmah and Bina, Yesod connects Netzach and Hod. That's its main thing. So it has an element of unity that's equal in all three of them. The other ones are just different personalities. So Chochmah and Chesed are both lean toward Chesed. They're both right-winged, so to speak. Bina and Gvura and Hod are more left-winged, so to speak.
You say the foundation beams. In a building, you can take away some beams, but there's foundation beams that you can't take away.
Absolutely, that's a similar idea. Yeah. So Mahus Echad Mamish. V'hainu sha'adas mamshich l'bchinas primis ha'keser. Which means, that means Das draws down from the inner kesser of Oisam Shocha Mamish. So both things Das has. It connects all the way to the root in Pnimius HaKesser, and it's Oisam Shocha Mamish. It's the same energy. That's not diminished. Hushanimshach b'bchinas Teferes v'Yesod. Oisam Shocha, that actual energy is what transmits into Teferes and Yesod, and therefore into Malchus ultimately. Now he says, and these two factors that we just said are interconnected, interdependent. Meaning, the fact that it goes from the highest point to the lowest point, and that it maintains the same quality, and does not it's not a different personality, is interconnected.
It's almost like there's
interdependent.
There's no right cob and left cob without connections through the middle cob.
Because the transmission comes from the inner dimension of Kesser, specifically Dafke Al-Kain and Mishtanis. Because it's the first thing is a cause for the second. Because it's rooted literally in the core of the inner Kesser, that's why its transmission, its energy does not change, does not. And literally that personality transmits into all the levels. And this is the meaning where we began this whole thing last chapter, Kuf Yud Gimel, which says in the Pardes, the Matseva, the pillar that Yaakov built, is Malchus b'yesim yuchedes im Teferes. How Malchus connects with Teferes. Now he's going to this Kavim Tzoi, I think. Tihine al pi seder ishtalshlus. Because according to the regular gradations, which really means the right and left transmissions, Malchus doesn't have this link, this express train link, so to speak, to the source. Well, how does Malchus come? Like in the regular order. Netzach, Hoid, Yesod, Malchus. So it goes through Netzach and Hoid, not just Yesod jumping to Teferes, to Das, to Pnimius Kesser. It receives from Netzach, Hoid, Yesod of Zah Rampin, which is the small face, as opposed to Arech Rampin, the large face. Meaning from the external feelings and emotions of Netzach, Hoid, Yesod, Hein Lebar Migufa. And that's what extends out of the body. So it goes like this. If you think of it, as I said, as a body, so Netzach Hed Yesod is like Netzach is the right leg, Hed is the left leg, Yesod is the organ, and Malchus is the nekeva. So it's outside. It's what's transmitting outside. So Malchus is receiving from Netzach Hed Yesod, the lowest levels, and it's Lebar Megufa. It's outside of the body. Malchus in that sense. So the body is
I think it live without the legs. That's the body of that's me. You lived the last time.
I'm saying Malchus doesn't get straight from the middle line.
You just list the line. In Seder Shtalshus it does. Out of Seder. In Seder Shtalshus, Malchus receives that. Yeah, Nehi, Hein Lebar Begufa, they are the legs that extend. The body, in other words, is essentially the torso and the chest. They extend outward. But I'm also saying, Hein Lebar Begufa, they extend outward, outside of the body.
Remember we learned about the hands also.
Yeah, we spoke about. We said that he calls it right. He calls it why he calls it outside, because
it extends from the body. A person could live without it.
But that's not what he said. What you're saying is your own thing. He didn't say that.
You said that then.
I don't recall that. No, he asked the question: why is midah connected? Why is the midah expressed in organs, outside external organs? So he said because the midas are external expressions, not like the meich. I don't know about living without. I don't know. No, he said there the other thing. You mean to say he said a person can't live without a mind and a heart? Maybe he said that. I don't remember. Maybe. Anyway, like speech. Malchus, remember, is speech. So speech is an external expression. It doesn't have all the depth. Speech, shemekabel, receives from the outer feeling. So let's say your intellect informs your emotions of love. And you never speak with the same intensity as your feelings. So it's an outer expression, from the outer emotion, like we see when a person is in intense excitement, he cannot speak. That's Malchus and Seder Shtalshus. So Malchus that's why it's the lowest sphere. That's why it's the moon that's dark. Because on its own, it's just the lowest of 10 spheres. However, when there's the union of Teferes and Malchus, like the Pardes says, what's happening then? In Malchus is being transmitted the core of the feelings. In other words, you're beginning to express in the Dibur, which is usually concealed, you're beginning to express much deeper and the core of the Midas. Like he says in Likutei Torah, that when you come to the land and you will plant. That's the Maimer. I think that's Bahar.
It's missing a couple of words.
It's Bahar, right? Or is it? It's not Kishaveh. Right. Like the distinction would be Malchus in its regular Seder Shtalshus is more Dibur as it speaks mundane matters, compared to Dibur that speaks wisdom. Then the Dibur is reaching and receiving a deeper transmission from deeper part of you than just when you speak superficial things, basically, is what he's saying. So he's saying, the same, just like the distinction between when a person speaks mundane matters, the speech speaks words of wisdom, same thing, Asara Maimoris, the 10 utterances that God stated to create the world, they're called words of the average, of the Hedjit, the common words, common. Because in them radiate only the Nihi, the outer expression. Nihi is the lower Chetzenius Hamidus. Nihi is, as we spoke about, is the lower extension of the Midas, not the full intensity. And that's what you say. Aval Aseres Hadibres Nimshach Behem B'chinas Pnimis HaChachma, because you have a Asara Maimoris, Aseres Hadibres. The 10 Dibres are much higher. They're not the same. Asar Mamor is the artist used to create. Remember we spoke, that's a limited flow. Aseres HaDibur is the artist is telling us what he wants with this piece of art. It's a whole different story now. It's telling us what he wants us to do in this world, not just what the world is. It's a beautiful way of looking at it. Asar Mamor is how to create the art, is the paintbrush, the palette, the creating the art, and Aseres HaDibur is the kavanah in it. And the Aseres HaDibur is that's nimshach b'hem b'chinas primis chachma v'ritzeni yisbarach. In these words now are not words that are just expressing common, conventional, superficial things, which is creation. It's now revealing in them nimshach, it's drawn in them primis, the inner dimension, the inner chachma and desire of God. V'zeu yichud teferes hamalchus, and this is the unity of teferes hamalchus u'kamaymer of teferes zumat teira. Like the man we say at Teferes in the pasuk, Teferes zumat and Teira. So Teira is Teferes, meaning it's more than just. So Malchus on its own can be the dibur that's simply creating the worlds. Like we spoke, Malchus enters in Biyah and it creates. Then there's Malchus as it connects to Teferes. That's already a deeper connection, and it brings down Teira, it brings down wisdom, it brings down a higher revelation. And the root of the unity of Teferes HaMalchus is rooted in the inner unity of Abba and Ima, of Chachma and Bina. And this is the unity and the union of sun and moon. Liyas Hamshachas Er Chezer. That in order to create and generate, the Hamshach Er Chezer is the reflective light of the moon. So the moon on its own, as we said, without a regular structure, the moon has a dark side, has a light side, and that's that. But as the moon grows, that's a sign of the student or the recipient is beginning to give back light. It's beginning to reflect light. And that reflected light that reaches into Biyah, into our worlds, that's already Ercheza, that's when the moon and sun begin to unite. Now Yichud Shimsha V'Sira is not talking about the 5 higher spheres, because that's always there. That part of the moon. We're talking about the lower, where the lower begins to grow, and that's the Yichud of Teferes, and he says it's also of Teferes and Malchus. So Teferes is the sun, Malchus is the moon, and he says it's also the union of Abba and Ima, which is interesting why he adds that. I'm not sure why, because usually Zoh and Malchus, that's sun and moon, Teferes and Malchus. Why does he bring Abba and Ima? Primis, okay. Yichud Primi Abba, the Abba v'Ima. Because I guess in some places Abba and Ima is the sun and the moon, maybe in the root. Maybe Bina, Chachma is the father, Bina is the mother, so Zal Malchus in the root is probably Primi, not Chetzeni, because Chetzeni is Abba V'Ima, he just said don't go all the way up, they go there. So the Primi is Abba V'Ima, that's why you say Primi is Chachma, Primi is Atik, it says Primi is Bina, Primi is Atik also. Right, okay, so it all works on all levels here, wow.
How does he create the Maimor?
Oh, now he's going to say Yichud Primi Ava, okay, he's going to explain it.
Didn't the Teferes, so the emotion interfere with his Dibur, or is that God Dibur? It's a whole different thing. You're just saying that.
No, well, when it comes from the regular flow, when a person's regular speech that we speak during the day, it's more superficial. It's speech as it's diminished from your feelings. The things you did in business, you don't talk about your deepest feelings. You talk external, superficial, limited things.
You can't speak if you're emotional. That's what you just.
That was one example. That shows you that speech is a limited flow of the emotions. When godly speech, when it's Torah speech, like he says, Chachma, wisdom, that the speech is now becoming a container, a channel for much deeper expression. Let me just see, is this a new subject? Let's read a few more lines, let's see where it goes. Yedua, and it's known, the Yichud Pnimi Dava, that this inner unity of the inner unity of Abba and Ima, Chacham Bina, hu shenimshach mebchinas primis hakesed dafka. That inner unity is drawn from the inner keser, specifically. Remember, Ayin Beis is very thorough, so he's bringing everything together. And this dimension, this unity of Abba Ima, is transmitted in Malchus through Teferes. So Teferes carries the inner unity of Abba and Ima into Malchus, and thus creating a full moon. Okay.
How does that stick together? It's again, it's
I'm going to stop here because I see V'yazel Yitzchak Al Shem Al Reshe. So that's right. We're going to stop here, middle of chapter Kuf Yudalad 114. We did page 220, 221.
Sounds like it's not.